Okay, thank you. So now we can begin the panel portion of our event, and I will hand it off to our incredible moderator, Blythe.
Hello, that's me. So my name is Blythe. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm so excited to be here moderating the panel today. So I'll start by introducing our distinguished alumni speakers. So first up is Cathy Taylor, who has been the executive director of the Ontario Nonprofit Network, a group that focuses on strengthening Ontario's 58,000 nonprofit organizations since June of 2012. Throughout her more than 25 years in working in the nonprofit sector, Cathy has had many roles in nonprofits and charities in addition to her current position. She was the founding executive director of the Volunteer Center of Guelph Wellington and has been involved in fundraising, event management, research, public policy, and much more for several organizations. Cathy's roots are in the environmental movement, and she has been active in municipal politics, and she holds a degree in political studies and history from Queen's. Super exciting. If there's any political science people here, represent. And next up, we have Stacy Kelly, who is the Director of Philanthropy at 519, a Toronto-based agency that promotes inclusion, understanding, and respect towards the LGBTQ2S community. He has over 25 years of experience in fundraising, development, and nonprofit management, with a focus on educational, social services, youth, and arts organizations. Through his many advancement roles, Stacy has developed expertise in campaign management, philanthropic operations and strategy, annual and major giving, and volunteer management. He has also proudly served as co-chair of the Queen's University Association of Queer Employees and as a co-chair of the new Queen's Queer Alumni Chapter. Stacy was awarded the Ontario Volunteer Service Award in 2017 and the Herbert J. Hamilton Volunteer Service Award from Queen's in 2019. He also studied philosophy, which is my major, so I like that. And last but of course not least, we have Barbara Grantham, who has acted as the president and CEO of CARE Canada since April 2020. CARE is part of an international confederation working in over 100 countries to realize the power and positive impact of women's leadership in their local communities. Before joining CARE, Barbara served as president and CEO for VGH and UBC Hospital Foundation and held executive positions with BC Children's Hospital Foundation, the Canadian Mental Health Association, and the Vancouver Foundation. Barbara serves on the board of directors of YMCA of Greater Vancouver, Jack.org, the Humanitarian Coalition of Canada, and CAN WACH. She is also a volunteer with the National Lawrence Scholars Program. In 2016, Barbara was named one of Women's Executive Network's annual Top 100 Most Powerful Women in Canada, and in 2019, she received the AFP Lifetime Achievement Award. So obviously we have some super cool people here with lots of achievements and awards and holding so many super positions. And then, so we have our first question. So for each question, you get between 2 and 3 minutes for your answer. And so first, I'm gonna go with Cathy can start, and then Stacy, and then Barbara. So the first question is, at what point in your career did you know that you wanted to participate in the not-for-profit sector?
Great. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all. I'm coming to you from Erin, Ontario, and looking forward to chatting today. I actually thought I was going to work in government when I left Queen's. That was my goal, to do policy work in government. I had always done a lot of volunteer work, but I didn't realize that there were actually careers in the nonprofit sector. And like many of us, unfortunately, I accidentally landed in the sector. It was a recession when I graduated in 1992, and there wasn't a lot of jobs available. Governments weren't hiring. And so I took a contract job with a nonprofit organization, and I've never looked back. So I think, finding that for me, it was the right fit and the right kind of work. Lots of different works. Every day was different. But I knew within the first few months of working in a nonprofit organization that that's where I wanted to spend my career.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And then Stacy, if you want to answer the question, I can read it again if you want.
Oh, no, that's great. And Cathy, very nice to meet you. We didn't have a chance to say hi earlier.
Nice to meet you, Stacy. Yeah. And
yeah.
hi, Barb.
I actually was involved in the nonprofit sector while as a student. I was actually the president of what was then called Science Floated for Co-op, I think is now the Kingston Student Housing Cooperative. So I was on the board and then became the president. And so, as a teenager, I was responsible for this, multi-million-dollar operation that owned 19 properties and housed hundreds of students. So it was a really great opportunity for me, really during my teen years. During my undergrad time, I then founded a theater company. And so I was doing work in the arts during that time. So I guess it was already a passion. I should say as well for everyone that I was a volunteer with the precursor to QSAA that was called STAR. And so I think I had a sense that there were things that one could do. But I think, like Cathy said, I would not have ever conceived of this as a career. I was actually in the private sector after graduation, and then was actually lured into the public sector and the not-for-profit sector by taking up a really great opportunity actually at Queen's. And then, kind of, as Cathy was saying, the rest happened after that. So yeah, I think, this is wonderful, this kind of event, because helping people understand the myriad of career paths that are out there and connecting you to alumni is a brilliant idea. So thanks so much for having me here.
And thank you for coming and sharing your wonderful expertise. And then Barbara, would you like me to reread the question, or are you good?
No, it's fine.
Excellent.
Thanks, Blythe. I think I've got it, and I've had two really thoughtful people go ahead of me. So it's lovely to see you, Cathy. And we didn't have a chance to say hi at the beginning. And I'll maybe just do a quick land acknowledgement, because I'm actually out in Vancouver today. And just want to acknowledge that I'm on Coast Salish territory. I'm on the traditional territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and grateful to be with all of you today. So my story is not unlike Cathy's, except 10 years older. I did an undergraduate degree at Queen's in poli-sci and economics, and thought, government, public policy was sort of my passion and my interest. I went and actually worked for the government for a couple of years in a very junior entry-level position. And then I went off and did a master's in public administration and public policy, and thought, this is what I'm going to do. And I graduated into a recession, the recession before the one that you graduated into. And there were no jobs in government. In fact, government, for probably one of the only times in post-war history, was laying off. Government in British Columbia was actually laying off people. And so I thought, I need a job. I had to do. So I'd had from this earlier government job, I had done student employment grant summer grant program. And I'd gotten to know a whole bunch of nonprofits because I was helping them negotiate contracts to hire students in their nonprofits for the summer. And so I thought, maybe some of those organizations that I'd done those contracts with when I was working for government would hire me. So I just started cold calling and phoning them up. And I ended up getting this tiny little contract with an NGO here in Vancouver. And within about a year, I found myself with the United Way, which is a very large federated organization, a national, in fact, an international footprint. And within about 2 years, I had no desire to go back to government. I loved the tribe that I had found at United Way and in the sector more widely. I loved the complexity of issues that I could do and talk about and think about and learn about in this sector, but with all due respect to my colleagues in the public service, without the hindrances and with more of an entrepreneurial spirit in how we approach the work than I thought I would find in government. And 30 years later, I'm still here.
And we're so glad you're still here and hanging on, doing still amazing work. And our next question. So how did you get your foot in the door, or what first step did you take to pursue your fields? And the order I'd like you to answer in, please, would be Stacy, Cathy, and then Barbara.
So I was working at Queen's in what I would call sort of, I mean, my colleagues might agree, what I call the greater institutional advancement. So I was really an admissions and recruitment specialist. Queen's sent me all over the world doing some really neat things. And I saw this opportunity, and I was really, actually a friend of mine at Queen's was like, hey, this sounds like you should do this. And I was really concerned because it was a 1-year job. And, you know, there's like, oh, do I leave a continuing permanent position for this? And I hummed and I hawed and I hummed and I hawed, and I decided to go for it. And it was a job at what is now known as the Smith School of Business, previously Queen's School of Business, in advancement, and which is, you know, more pure in the fundraising. And it was a job that would report, so dotted line, one to central at Queen's and one to the dean, and really working to really help build philanthropy and a culture of philanthropy at the School of Business. And it was a new role, and the dean believed in the value of this role and took a chance on me, as far as I'm concerned. And it was an extraordinary experience. And I got to work. The title was Advancement Officer. And I worked very closely with classes and class giving, of which there is now quite an extraordinarily robust culture. I was happy to be part of the engine that I guess really tried to kick that off. And of course, and what's known in the industry is leadership giving or mid-level giving. So talking to alumni and individuals and families to secure a kind of certain level of gifts. And it was just incredible training. It was a great, now I think there are 12 or 14 person operation. I think we were 3. And it was just incredible training ground. Wonderful support of the dean. And just, I loved what you said, Barbara. Just, even though it was, again, within a larger institution, it was certainly a very startup, entrepreneurial, let's be nimble, let's be reactive. And this isn't necessarily on purpose. I've often been the first person in a lot, if you look at my career and my resume, it's sort of like this, for some reason, I am attracted to that, and I had, in fact, done some of my own startups in my own life, but there is an interesting opportunity to really be creative, engaging. And as I always like to tell people, it's sort of like the many hats you're going to wear, right? Public relations, marketing, communications, writing, journalism. I've written op-eds, you know what I mean? So it's sort of like, I see my colleagues that we do all of the things you may be interested in doing, and there's no, I was a recruiter. I would recruit students to Queen's, and I would, I can't go to Queen's, you don't have journalism. And I'd be like, that probably some of the most famous journalists, both print and broadcast in this country, are all Queen's grads. Yeah, they did a degree in sociology, in history, in English, and of course, political studies. And it's sort of like, that's a message I would say to you, is that, our sector, just the amount of hats you can wear and skills you'll develop and expertise that beyond sort of the technical piece around fundraising, there's this whole host of, related and adjacent skill sets that you will be building that will probably completely surprise you.
I love that. That sounds so awesome. Like whatever is there for you, there's something that you'll love, of all those hats, you'll find your top hat or whatever your favorite kind of hat is. Cathy, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. So when I was looking for work after graduating, I think I applied for over 100 jobs, and I had a list, just applying for anything that, was remotely related to a general arts degree in, poli-sci and history. And I landed a contract for an environmental organization. It was called the Ontario Environment Network, like 4 people, small organization, trying to connect environmental nonprofits across Ontario. And I was the database and a conference coordinator. So it was a 1-year contract to organize a conference and to do literally data entry about environmental groups across the province. But what that taught me was, first of all, I got to travel Ontario. I got to meet hundreds of environmental groups back in the 90s that were doing amazing work in communities. And I really got to know them because I created the database about them and organized the conference. And it also, it was a stepping stone in realizing all the skills that you have to have and all the building blocks when you're building your career. So event management, database, spreadsheets, publications, all of those kind of things. And that, just led to a couple more contracts where I worked for a capital campaign for the hospital, our local hospital foundation. I worked as an event organizer for the Heart and Stroke Foundation. So much similar to today's time, there was a lot of contract work available, not a lot of permanent jobs. And at the time, I remember thinking it was a real drag. I mean, there was no, going from contract to contract. But very quickly, I realized I was building a network. I was using so many skills. I was learning so much, different types of organizations, different types of jobs. I did communications in one job. I did research in another. So I actually became an executive director at 32, which was young at the time in our community. I was one of the youngest executive directors in Guelph at the time. But I felt like I had about 7 contracts of working with so many different organizations of all of these types of activities that really gave me a strong footing to be able to sort of leap into a leadership role.
Awesome. That's so cool. Barbara, if you want to go.
Cathy, this is so funny because I've known you for a long time and I had no idea that we had all of these kind of parallel universe experiences. I feel like we were twins separated at birth or something. So my experience was very similar. As I said, I had finished grad school. I'd had this 2-3 year period with government in between my degrees. No jobs, started cold calling, got a tiny little contract editing a newsletter for a very small 6-8 person shop social planning organization in Vancouver. Tiny little organization. I think there was one computer in the office and it was the days of floppy disks. Like no one in this call except maybe Cathy and me even knows what a floppy disk is. And Stacy's nodding his head too. But from there, I met all of these other nonprofits through my work with the Social Planning Council. And so I just started to meet other people. I started to develop some networks. And I learned, as you said, all these different skills: writing, editing, communications, writing press releases. I learned about outreach. I learned about facilitation, group facilitation, meeting convening, grant writing, all of these things. I didn't know it at the time, but those were all the skills that I was building in a very practical way. Somewhere along the way, as I said, I'd met somebody from United Way and they said, oh, we need a part-time person to do this tiny little contract for us here at United Way. And I thought, okay. And I grabbed it. And then so I had like this little bundle of all these part-time contracts. But within about a year, United Way had offered me a full-time 1-year contract, much like Stacy. But that was really the opening for me to see the richness of what this sector offers, and the richness of the work and the conversations that I got to be a part of. This was in the late 1980s in Vancouver, and I was given the portfolio of trying to work with a whole bunch of NGOs in Vancouver around how the social service sector should be responding to the very early days of the HIV/AIDS crisis. We didn't have a language for it then. We did not have an activated LGBTQ community to really rally around. It was a very, very different time. And the other portfolio that I was given was cultural diversity. And we didn't have a language for that. All we knew was that suddenly the community was looking different. The languages being spoken were different, and the school system and the social service system and our healthcare system all needed to change and evolve and learn and adapt. And I had the United Way file for both of those issues. And that was when I really began to understand, wow, this is a whole set of possibilities. So I got my first CEO job when I was 29. It's not a competition, but I was 29 with the Canadian Mental Health Association. But I guess my observation would be relative to my colleagues and my friends and my own kids who have careers in the public service, in educational institutions, in corporations. There's a more linear path, not always, but there is generally a more linear path of progression from one job to the next in those larger settings. In the nonprofit sector, it's not linear like that. It's not like you're going from a PM1 to a PM2, or from a management level 1 to management level 2, or from, it doesn't work that way. You do have to be more, frankly, mindful of watching your own career. You have to take advantage of every opportunity that you're given and absorb it and soak it in like a sponge and use that to move yourself forward in the next way. So it's a different vantage point, and it's a different approach to professional career development. It's maybe not for the faint of heart, but it's pretty rich. It's pretty rich.
Awesome. And then the third question. Are there any misconceptions that you believe people may have about the not-for-profit sector? Good question. So first, please, Cathy, then Barbara, then Stacy.
Oh, this is my favorite question, Blythe. One of the, I talk about this, I get to talk about the sector a lot. And one of my favorite misconceptions is that we're all a bunch of well-meaning volunteers that can just be, activated in a second. We used to use the term freeze-dried volunteer. You just pour water on it and a whole bunch of volunteers show up. Whereas the infrastructure of the sector in Ontario, for example, 58,000 nonprofit organizations, half of them have paid staff, 1 million workers in Ontario, more workers in the nonprofit sector in Ontario than in the automotive industry in Ontario. There are jobs, there are legal jobs, there are policy jobs, there are communications jobs, there are accounting jobs, fundraising jobs, office management jobs, project management jobs. There are just so many jobs and richness. If you think about, the nonprofit and charitable sector includes the Stratford Festival, it includes Sick Kids Foundation, it includes your rural Rotary clubs and art programs and boys and girls clubs and social service organizations. So it's quite a breadth of a sector. There are lots of jobs and lots of opportunities, no matter what you're interested in and what your career path is. And I often, it honestly drives me crazy that in high schools and in universities, we don't talk about the nonprofit sector as a career of choice, because there's a perception that it is either volunteer based or really crappy pay, frankly. And a lot of organizations pay well. We have pensions and benefit plans now, not everyone, but that certainly is something that our organization actually works hard for, is to make sure there are pension and benefits for nonprofit organizations and their workers. So I just, one of the myths I like to bust is there are a huge amount of opportunities. There's job boards just for the nonprofit sector, just for the fundraising sector. And a lot of folks just don't know about it until they accidentally land in it. And so, happy to share those resources with you as well.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. Also, I love that you mentioned the Stratford Festival. I love it. And like the swans along the river, stream, not sure, but I love them.
Awesome. Well, you have to go this year. They're all outside. All the performances this year are going to be outside in an open air theater. So.
Oh, I'll have to look that up. It'll be like in the true spirit of the globe. Awesome. Next, Barbara, if you have an answer.
Thank you. Thanks, Blythe, and thanks, Cathy. So my early days, and even till very recently, I think would have been similar to what Cathy said, in that I had people, and not so much anymore, but certainly for many, many years, would, I'd say what I was doing, whether I was vice president at Vancouver Foundation, which is one of the largest community foundations, one of the largest endowments on the continent, not just in Canada, but on the continent. Working at the VGH Foundation, one of the 5 largest healthcare philanthropies in the country. I don't say that because it's about me, but I would literally have people say to me, "Is that a full-time job?" And I just want to say to them, I work with a team. We're $100 million a year operation. Like, I'm bigger than many private sector companies, and so there's that's maybe symbolic of the kind of misperceptions that we see about the sector. So, as Cathy has so evocatively said, the sector, not only in Ontario, has more jobs than the automotive industry, but if you look nationally, it has more jobs than virtually all of the extractive industries combined. We're responsible for about 8 to 9% of Canada's GDP on a rolling average in any given year. So we are a huge part of the economy, and we're a huge part of the lifeblood of every single community, whether you live in a small rural community or whether you live in an urban downtown core. I think one of the, it's not so much maybe a misconception about the sector, but one of the little gems about the sector is its range. And so some people tend to think of the nonprofit sector as being the visible parts, the health charities, the hospital foundations, the social services organizations, but you can be an arts person in the sector. You can be a person who really is passionate about the environment, and you can have a whole career now working for environmental NGOs. You can work in animal welfare. You can work for people with disabilities. You can work in youth empowerment. You can work in mental health. There are so many important issues of our time. And we need all of you. We need all 68 of you that are here today. We need your time and your talents and your exceptional gifts and your thoughtful approach to the world, because Canada needs you. This country needs all of you in the years to come. So don't have any misperceptions about the sector. It's rich and ready and waiting for the talents that all of you have to offer.
That last little bit sounds like an inspirational commercial. Like, we need all of you, like in a good way, I love it. Stacy, if you want to answer.
Oh, just so beautifully spoken about Cathy and Barbara. I just, I wanted to sort of send cheers, and I couldn't agree more. Thank you for an excellent summary. I'll provide maybe a specific example, not because I think honestly, Cathy and Barbara answered it really perfectly, but I think maybe a sub-thread, which is sort of related to the specific work that I do in the world of philanthropy and fundraising. And I was at a cocktail party, and someone, the usual, what do you do? And by the way, we need to change the answers to those questions and have a lot of fun with people. So I did the terrible answer, which is, this is actually what I do, my job. And they were just like, oh, I could never beg for money. And, and of course I was quite intrigued by that response. And of course, that's not what I do. And so I've changed my answer. I help, I have conversations about what matters to people. And I help connect people's passions to a cause that matters to them. I talk about their visions for the world. I talk about how they want to make a difference. I talk about the problems that they're seeing and how they may want to help be a part of the solution. Right? That's the work we do. So that's actually how I start answering questions now. And boy, do people ever lean in? Because people, of course, just, they're the typical job title, et cetera. And so, in the spirit of what Cathy and Barbara were saying, I guess the only other thing I would add is, I think sometimes there's, especially, from some of the sort of MBA world, this idea that we're all just loosey-goosey and have no idea what we're doing. And, depending on the type of consultants you engage with, there's folks who seem to think that, I loved what you said, Cathy, we're just sort of like freeze-dried volunteers. This is a sector that attracts some of the bestest, brightest, most engaging, most passionate people you will ever meet. Whenever any of us are at conferences, it's just, passion and commitment. And it's about trying to achieve and making the world a better place. We are cause-based people. We're we live and breathe, the ideas of social justice and making change and addressing drastic inequalities that we see every day. So I think if you can answer that that's what you do, it's really quite a beautiful sector to be a part of.
That was extremely well said. I'm getting like some warmth in my diaphragm from all the warm fuzzy feelings and like passion of like, yes, let's go. The next question. This one's also gonna give me warm fuzzies. So, what has been your most rewarding experience working in your fields? We can start with Barbara, then Stacy, and then Cathy, please.
Oh boy. This is the first question you've asked where I didn't have the answer like right away. And of course, this is the one where I'm first. My most rewarding experience. Well, I'll share a story with you. And it might not be my most rewarding experience, but it's evocative for me of why I've made this choice, why I've chosen this path. It was when I was the CEO at the Canadian Mental Health Association, and I was the CEO of what we called the BC division. So I was responsible for all of the association's work in British Columbia at what we called the provincial office. And one of our mandates, even back then, we didn't have a language for it around diversity and inclusion and equity, but we made an effort, a very intentional effort, and had a principled approach to employing people with mental illness inside the organization and having people with mental illness on our board, and took a very inclusive approach. And we had a consumer empowerment program that we received a government grant for. And by consumer, I mean a consumer of mental health services. And we hired people with lived experience with mental illness to be the staff people for that program. And one of them was a fellow, he's since passed away. He had some very complex issues, both physical health challenges and mental health challenges that had really given him a long period of struggling through a good portion of his adult life. But he'd made a set of very positive strides. And we hired him to be one of the consumer advocates in this program. And his name was Gary. And a couple of weeks after he started, he came into my office and he said, do you have a minute? And I said, sure. And he said, I think I just got my first paycheck. And I said, oh. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, like we've made a mistake. There's been some kind of an error in making out the check. This was, there's no direct deposit. This was a check. This was actually a piece of paper. That's what a check is. And and it, it was made out to him, and it was, for whatever his 2 weeks of pay was. And I said, well, what's the problem, Gary? And he said, I had no idea that I would be paid this much money. I haven't had a job for a very, very long time. Is this all for me? And I said, yeah, that's your salary. That's your pay. And he just sat there stunned that there was worth for him. He was worthy of this. And it wasn't about the money per se. It was about that feeling of worth that we were able to give him. And that was a real profound moment of learning for me about why I do this work, is to hopefully bring that sense of purposefulness and that sense of worthiness for as many people as possible.
I knew it was going to give me the touchy-feelies. I'm so glad that happens, and I'm sure Gary was not the only person that you have helped or that any of our panelists have had experiences with, so that's awesome. Stacy, if you want to go.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, for sharing that. So the 519 Church Street Community Center, we operate as the 519, is in downtown Toronto in the historic Gay Village. And in March 15, 2020, we were ordered to close, obviously, by Toronto Public Health. And while we closed our doors, we didn't stop operating. And we pivoted very quickly to make sure we could provide direct essential support and services to our most marginalized and vulnerable community members. And we see ourselves as sort of also like being really responsible for the downtown east neighborhood. So, beyond our sort of traditional catchment area. And the provision of daily food service for free, of course, harm reduction supplies, clothing, toiletries, a lot of what I would call sort of essential needs. We quickly came up with an essential needs service that people could access in person. And then we took a lot of our other really important services like newcomer support, tax clinics, and made them virtual. Now, I'm the director of philanthropy, so I spend most of my time talking to donors and obviously building campaigns and all of those things that we usually do. And so I found myself with an apron, making food, preparing food, and being out in the community, being in the park behind us, talking to folks who are experiencing homelessness, basically being one of our wonderful, incredible I'm not wonderful, incredible, but being like one of our wonderful, incredible frontline staff who I just think are the most amazing people, and doing that kind of community engagement work. And I did that for quite a few months during 2020. So it was an opportunity for me to sort of, be and experience our purpose for being. And it was extraordinarily rewarding and meaningful. And because I was doing it enough, I started to build relationships with folks. And that was really incredible, because then we were able to connect them to what we call wraparound services, housing support, mental health support, medical support, how to deal with the police support, how to deal with being evicted support. It's a full-fledged work we do. And I think maybe that also answers the previous question about, sort of misperceptions. I mean, we are their frontline services. A lot of charitable organizations, social service organizations, the problems we're facing aren't simple, right, and linear. They're it's like an onion. You unpack these things, and so each human being you encounter requires customized level of care and support, and people believing in them. And I have to tell you, the cards and notes and messages that we continue to receive on a daily basis from community members just make us all like cry and realize that, yay, we are making a difference. And so I would say that that has probably been the most rewarding thing for me. It was like, I knew intellectually, of course, what we're doing. It's not that I never engaged with community members, but not in that way in my particular role. And so that itself was just a beautiful opportunity for me to connect with my colleagues and more importantly, connect with our community members.
That's awesome. And obviously no one, well, not most people do the things for rewards, but like getting those little notes, that sounds so awesome. And I think, like you said earlier, Stacy, like we're doing it just to make the world a better place and spreading that like positivity and happiness and making people better off from where they started. That's just awesome. So hype. Kathy, if you want to answer.
Oh my goodness, Stacy and Barbara are just so motivating, and those are such awesome stories. I could feel myself in those moments. Thank you for sharing. It's so hard to pick one. I think, a couple of years ago, for a few years at my organization, we've been working to help nonprofits see themselves as employers and to create what we call decent work. So good jobs and in the nonprofit sector. And we had an aha moment. And one of our aha moments when we were looking at our research was that 80% of the workers in the nonprofit sector were women. And not only are 80% women, they're not in leadership positions necessarily. More men are in leadership positions, or women are in frontline services. And of those frontline services, often the women are Indigenous, Black, or racialized women working in frontline services and not in leadership positions. So what we decided to do was really stop and listen to what women that work in the nonprofit sector were experiencing. And we did a survey and we did focus groups, and we heard from 800 women, and we created a report called Women's Voices about how women were experiencing work in the nonprofit sector. And it was humbling, it was inspiring, it was shocking to hear stories. And like any other sector, there are challenges, there are issues, there are systemic issues as well. And so it's really a real opportunity for us to shine a light on that and to work towards what are some of the solutions. So we created 10 solutions. One of them was a pension plan that would benefit women workers. And we were told that, you couldn't create a pooled pension plan for nonprofit workers with all these different employers. It's not possible. You need one big employer. But we made it work. And now there's almost 3,000 employees in Ontario that have enrolled in this pension plan over the last 2 years that would never have had a pension plan, representing 75 or 80 organizations. So I think for me, that was a real highlight to be able to talk about openly the research and data about where women were working in the nonprofit sector, what some of their barriers were, and to shine a light on some of the issues that were completely and continue to be completely solvable when we actually address them head on.
That's awesome. Y'all are just dropping like these cool facts that I didn't know. And I think, like Cathy mentioned earlier, I just want to like soak it all up like a sponge, and I'm trying, but I'm glad that this is recorded. So our next question, it's kind of a two-parter. So do you have any advice for current students considering or pursuing a career in the not-for-profit industry? And then the like sub question to that is, at Queen's, were there any specific activities or opportunities that you found helpful for your career. And the order, if we can go Stacy, Barbara, and then Cathy, please.
Hello again. Yeah, I guess I'll start with the first part, which would be my best advice would be to start understanding yourself and ask yourself some questions about what are the things that really matter to me? What are the things that drive me? What are the things that would make me get up and run out the door? And what are the the issues? What are the big questions, the big topics that really motivate you? And you can identify the organizations pretty quickly that are also trying to tackle those. And then what you need to do is use the wonderful power of like something like linkedin.com/alumni, and you'll realize it tells you where all the Queen's grads are in those organizations. It's a beautiful tool. People don't often use that tool to its maximum advantage. And it'll tell you, so great, you've identified those, you can tell them, you can reach out to them. And you know what, I mean, for the most part, in my experience, both as a receiver and someone, Queen's folks like to, help out, request an informational interview, sort of, 20 minutes of time. You should have a plan, before you do that in terms of what your questions are going to be. But people generally want to help, especially in our sector. That's kind of who we are. And get those informational interviews to understand people's pathways, to understand opportunities, to understand what's happening in the sector, and to maybe to better help you understand, as I think we've been trying to tonight, what are the different potential pathways. And understand that I love that Barbara's advice, but it's not necessarily always linear. But as Cathy was so awesomely saying, like, honestly, like if marketing gets you jazzed up, you could be the most amazing marketer in our sector. You could have a budget of $2 million. Like depends right now. Like it's a great sector. And so have those interviews with alum, go to different alumni events. Obviously there are chapters across this wonderful country of ours and in other countries. Go to those events. When we can. Go to the virtual ones, obviously. Go to those events eventually when willing, we're able to actually do this again. But even now, you can still reach out by phone or by video conference and just have those conversations with alum. I did one 2 nights ago for a current grad student who reached out to me. I won't say no. I mean, we all care. Like we care about the future, as Barbara said, we need you. And I've forgotten part 2.
Yeah, sorry. I know it was kind of a long question, but part 2 was, were there any specific activities or opportunities you found helpful?
Well, as I mentioned before, I was a president of science for co-op, and I had a few other kind of key things I was doing, the theater company, etc. And what did I do? Well, I was the founding artistic director. What did I have to do? I had to raise money. So here I was at 20 years old, banging the doors, doing the cold calls, raising money from our organization. I had a tech team of 30. I had 60 actors. I'm really proud of that. I was still at Queen's. I took a little bit of a sabbatical, did that, came back. So, when I was then, positioning myself, it was like, look, I was this teenager, this kid, here's the things that I was responsible for, budgets, marketing, communications, what were the skills? So think about yourself through the work you're doing at Queen's and your clubs and your organizations. What's the leadership? What are the tangible, transferable skills that you can demonstrate? Because we understand it's not like you can say, well, here's my, 14-year history of jobs, but guess what? Most likely in being Queen's folks who are extremely energized and involved, you probably have a lot of the great transferable skills that organizations are looking for. So figure those out and tell that story really well, and then figure out those connections and entryways through the Queen's Alumni Network so you understand you're educating yourself. So I'm really sorry, do have homework. So have questions, ask yourself those good questions, figure out those things that excite you, and then identify those companies and go find the alumni to talk to. That is really my best advice. And if you reach out to me, I won't say no.
Make sure everyone writes that on a sticky note. Stacy doesn't say no, contact after exams. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. And then Barbara, if you'd like to go, I can repeat the question if you need.
I think I'm good. It was, what advice would I offer? And then what did I do at Queen's that was helpful, right? Yeah. So 4 things in terms of advice. One of them has been already really eloquently I think spoken to by Stacy, and that is figure out what gets you up every day. Just figure out what lights your fire in the world. And there's no course. It's just, it will, it's something that just kind of comes to you, but really figure out what is that passion? What is that difference in the world that you want, that you want to make? Number 2, do that BA in philosophy, do that BA in humanities, do that BA in social sciences. It's there. Those are critically important degrees for us to have in this country. It's all the AI in the world is gonna solve many problems for us as a society, but we need people who think. We need people who know how to put a cogent case together, an argument. I don't mean a debate, I mean a thoughtful line of thinking to help a group of people get to a decision and a conclusion and a consensus about something. And that's what this undergrad degree in social sciences or humanities, whatever it might be, just do that generalist degree. It's really important. And if you don't believe me, then read Range by David Epstein, because he talks about the importance of the range of skills that you get in those undergraduate arts degrees. The third is take other courses, because the biggest difference for someone like me, and I think probably Cathy, is when I was entering the sector, there were no college courses, there were no degrees in nonprofit leadership, there were no continuing education courses in how to run a nonprofit, there were no courses in nonprofit marketing or accounting or management or governance. None of that existed. And we literally my generation, with all due respect, wrote the textbooks that many of these courses are now using. Use that, take that to your advantage and use that to supplement the generalist education that you're getting in that undergraduate degree. And then my fourth advice would be read and listen. With all due respect and showing my age, less time on social media and more time reading substantive things, reading the discourse of our times, because the combination of that undergraduate degree that you're pursuing and that's teaching you how to think and analyze, and then take content pieces out of rich and meaningful kind of current affairs material is going to help you to make that find that spark and that passion of what really drives you. So that would be my answer to the first question. My second the second one was what was helpful at Queen's. And for me, it was seeing that classes were only the beginning. Classes were just the start. And the experience, I was the AMS president in my 4th year at Queen's, and all of many of the leadership skills, whatever they are, that I've developed to this day, started at Queen's. My ability, again, whatever it may be, to understand differences of opinion, how to frame a discussion, how to bring a thoughtful group of people together and convene a conversation. All of those, I look back now and I can see that many of those skills were seeded in my time at Queen's. And with all due respect, the classwork was important. The reading, the profs, all of that was important. But I got so much out of the life that I lived outside of the classroom at Queen's. That was a really fundamental part of my life education.
Thank you. That's awesome. And we're moving on to our last moderated question. And then after this question, we'll go to questions from anyone. So this question is, sorry, I was muted. We'll go to the last question. How has COVID-19 impacted your work, or how do you think your field will change in the next 10 years? So the order would be Barbara, Cathy, and then Stacy, please.
Wow, that's a really rich conversation, Blythe. I feel so like I'm just bursting actually with enthusiasm that you asked me the question, and I'm really going to try to just keep it to a couple of minutes. So CARE is an international humanitarian and development organization. For those folks amongst us today who don't know, so we work in internationally in about 100 countries, and our primary mandate is the alleviation of poverty and the creation of a more equal world for all of us. But primarily we do that by enabling women's leadership in local communities where they live. Women leaders are critical for communities to be healthy and safe, for people to have dignified livelihoods, for those local communities to be addressing issues of climate justice, and all of those important complex issues. But women's leadership is proven and shown to be essential to making all of those other indicators, to put them on a positive trajectory. COVID-19 has fundamentally changed our work in a couple of ways from a humanitarian and a development perspective. But I guess the broadest way that I can frame it is that it has rapidly shown us the driving imperative and the need to decolonize and localize the entire endeavor of humanitarian and development work in that international context. That conversation's been happening in the wider world for a number of years now. The global north, global south dichotomy, that conversation. COVID-19 has brought it home in sharp relief, largely because when COVID-19 hit, and I say this very carefully and very respectfully, we from the global north essentially all came home. And it was largely left to people in the global south to, I say carefully, to figure out how to best move forward within those local contexts without the traditional presence, physical presence. Sometimes the financial assistance was still there, but sometimes it was not. But it has brought into sharp relief that we do not always have the right answers about how to do this work, and that we have to rapidly and dramatically shift how we think about this work to bring a more socially just, more anti-colonial, more anti-racist, and more equitable way of doing this work. And that means us, in quite literal terms, us, the well-intentioned folks from the global north, are not going to be getting on planes anymore and going there to deliver the training workshop. That burns up too many carbon emissions, and we don't need to do that. We can use technology in many cases. We can use those same resources that we would have spent on a ticket to go to Zimbabwe and come back. They're much better off going to that local women's rights organization in Zimbabwe to lead that work with some technical support from us, with some maybe some knowledge transfer from us, maybe one trip in 3 compared to what we used to do, but it really is about local empowerment and changing that power dynamic over the next 5 to 10 years.
That's awesome. I definitely agree. I've seen those changes myself, with just probably more so on social media, which I know you said wasn't great, but yeah, exasperating those issues and inequality. So I'm so glad that you're doing that work and using technology. It's awesome. And then next to Cathy, please.
Yeah, so COVID-19 really affected our work dramatically, really overnight. You know, my organization's job is to advocate on behalf of nonprofits and charities to the provincial government and a little bit to the federal government. And so everything we were advocating for shifted immediately. What nonprofits and charities needed was completely different during the pandemic. And of course, we all started working remotely as well. For us, we started working on issues that we had never even imagined working on. Vaccination prioritization, how to helping organizations to do virtual, annual general meetings, for example, to making sure that government understood that nonprofits and charities were their partners on the ground and were better positioned to support communities in many cases, to make sure that, what was actually an essential worker needed to stay open or needed the support. We worked on getting PPE to frontline social services and advocating for extra funding to be able to renovate and support organizations to be able to safely reopen in their communities. And throughout the pandemic, we actually did 3 sort of surveys, kind of trying to keep up on top of what nonprofits and charities needed. And when the one we did maybe August, September of last year, so sort of 6 months into the pandemic, showed us that 1 in 5 nonprofits and charities were going to close in 2021. And yesterday, this morning, I got a report on sport organizations, and 1 in 3 sport organizations in Ontario have declared bankruptcy already. And so the impact on our sector is dramatic. It will shrink dramatically in the next year or two, partially because the revenue has dried up. If they're fee-for-service organizations like sports or arts that counted on ticket sales and registration fees and sponsorships, it literally, there was no funding available. Social service organizations, their funding may have been maintained, but the need skyrocketed. So they needed more staff, more supports, more resources. And there's some that had some great fundraising and were quite successful in the pandemic, and others that struggled. So it will be a very different nonprofit and charitable sector in the next few years. On the plus side, I think it is an opportunity to build back better. And I know lots of people are using that phrase, but both in terms of how we serve our communities, local, equitable. I totally agree with Barbara. I think that's as pertinent in Canada and in our communities as it is on the international stage. And there's a huge reckoning that our sector in the work that we do have to take in terms of anti-colonialism and anti-racism. But it's also an opportunity to leverage technology. Many of our organizations, never invested in technology because their boards and donors didn't think it was a good investment. And guess what? It's a brilliant investment. And those of us that were able to pivot overnight were because we already had Mac laptops, because we thought it was important for our staff to have cutting edge computers. So I think it has shifted the narrative a little bit and will continue to shift. But what keeps me up at night is who's going to be left, and how do we fill the gaps when we do start reopening at some point, when community members are going to expect that their sport organization is just going to start tomorrow, and their arts and their seniors program for their mom and dad is going to be open, next week. And we can't, it's not like opening a coffee shop on the corner. It takes 5 years to build an organization and a board and get the support you need. And in Niagara Falls, the YMCA closed in Niagara Falls. It will take years to build that infrastructure to replace a YMCA that does immigrant services and childcare and fitness and all of those things. So that's what keeps me up at night, but I am optimistic that there are some really engaging opportunities for our sector to grow and develop and really focus on what's important as we go forward.
Wow, that's yeah, wow. And last is Stacy.
So I'm going to answer the question by providing everyone a little bit of context. So, I mean, if any of you are fans of the Golden Girls, as I am a massive fan, picture this, Toronto 2019. So, I mean, the 519, just to give you a quick, it is Canada's largest and most prominent LGBTQ community center and service provider. We're a huge operation, and in a typical year we would have 170,000 visits to the programs that just our staff run. But in addition, get ready for this, 220 organizations use the 519 space in a year. They host over something like 4,500 events in it's a really busy place. And so the question that happened at the emergency directors meeting on March 16th, 2020 it was an existential question. Blythe, you'll appreciate this. How does a community center serve its community when it can no longer have them in the center? So how do we figure out, and as you can imagine, COVID-19 exacerbated what were already existing extraordinary social inequalities in the city of Toronto, as most of us are aware. I don't know who's the quote winner of this, social inequality capital. I know that both of our larger cities are all, but Toronto is just, it's, from food insecurity, all the issues, I'm sure. If not, as Barbara said, get yourself reading them. The United Way's report was extremely humbling and upsetting, which just made us all want to just do our work even more. So how do we help community, which, by the way, was counting and expecting. We've been here for 45 years. It's our 45th year. To be there and respond. And so that was our moral imperative, was to answer that question. And so, as Cathy said, thankfully, we have a board who, there was never any pushback around making those kind of investments. And we were already on the way to, we'd already made the investments before the pandemic in terms of being able to do that quick pivot. And thank goodness that we had the foresight to do that, both from my own department. I moved us to a cloud-based program in 2019, and we were already on Teams for the organization. So, it was simply a matter of redeploying and figuring out two kinds of operation. It was sort of like who can and should be remote based, who can and should be frontline based, and especially the first sort of maybe 3/4 of 2020, it was a sort of rotational program, and it didn't matter what your job was. We are now going to be about responding to the public health crisis in our community, and that was our mission, and it continues to be our mission. So it, our light of sight, it's easy, simple, but a incredibly brutal task, right? So that was our moral imperative, to figure those pieces out. One, because community counted on us, but more importantly, because the community desperately needs the support of an organization like ours. Many community members, which was one of the few places where they feel safe to be their true and whole selves. So that was really the big thing. So part of it was sort of how do we do this so we can keep our staff safe, motivated, understanding, right? So the staff who we care very much about, how do we manage them? How do we manage their mental health? How do we manage their needs, understandings, their fears and concerns during this time? How do we help our community partners, of which he's a minimum of 220? How do we help them understand sort of what their parameters are going to be? And then how do we build our coalitions to make sure that we can, work together in our downtown east, to make sure that no one is left behind? That was, what I meant to say was simple but not easy. Those are really the simple questions. They're simple questions. They're not easy answers, but that is really what our organization had to do. And one of the jokes I would make internally was like, strategic plan, right? Because, for those who are maybe in business studies, I think one of our hosts is doing a business certificate. You study disruption, right? You study disruption in business. My goodness, what a disruptive year. But I think, like I said, we had a moral imperative to find the answers.
Yeah, I did appreciate that question. So thank you. So that's it for the moderated questions. And now we can move on to the unmoderated questions. So first of all, I'd just like to thank each of our panelists for such amazing answers and all of your experiences and insights and those awesome stories. Thank you so much for sharing them. So if you are a participant or an audience member, you can ask your questions. You can type them in the chat and I can read them out. You can direct them to a specific panelist or just to anyone. Or if you want to speak, you can raise your hand using the raise hand function and I'll call on you to speak. There we go. Alrighty. Sadie McFadden, if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks everybody for such amazing answers today. So I was just wondering, just kind of more on this idea of anti-colonialism. So I'm a history major and a global development minor. So you can imagine that we talk a lot about like the history of missionaries, whether it be like within the history of Canada with Indigenous peoples, or if it's across the water in Kenya. So I was just kind of wondering how you ensure that white saviorism isn't something that, like, how do you make sure you're not pushing forward that narrative of white saviorism? And then when your company does get critiqued, those type of, or not your company, when your nonprofit gets critiqued, those types of things, how do you go forward with that? How do you face that topic? And that's kind of directed at everybody.
I guess anyone who has the answer first can go.
Well, I can start if you want. So at the 519 directors table, of which I'm a member, there are 6 of us, who are the senior leadership of the organization. Spent actually, oh goodness, a good solid year working with really outstanding organization to help us develop our anti-racism and equity framework for the organization, and that was a really incredibly really powerful process to have those kind of conversations, and then figure out, okay, again, back to the action pieces. How do the men act? I'm gonna make up a word, but actionize the intent, right? There can have the intent. We need to make sure that there's concrete things that we do, and then each director was also tasked to think about within their respective units around how do we look at decolonizing philanthropy, for example. How do we, to your point, so we've been doing a lot of really great and on my team specifically, some really great webinar pieces around there's a great new I'm going to forget the title. I can make sure I provide it to afterward. It's an incredible title that just came out about looking at the philanthropy sector in Canada, the US, and experiences of BIPOC people in our sector. And again, the lessons learned and some outstanding recommendations in the book for us to consider. So that's a piece. We also established the Black Collective at the 519, and similar. It's not called the Trans Collective; it's a Trans Engagement Strategy Group by members of our trans community who were on staff, and so. We're looking, again, there's kind of constant interaction between sort of, these three groups, and figuring out how do we work together to ensure that the work we do internally, the kind of communications, the messaging, everything that needs to be as part of that conversation is happening at the organization. And that also included internally making sure, pay equity. I mean, if you go and take a look at, I think, you'll see this, we have a really great, actual, diversity and inclusivity, because we actually teach it. we teach LGBTQ inclusion, and so we definitely want to make sure that we're obviously leading along the way as well as advocating. So thank you for that question. It's obviously ongoing work. It had begun, I like to say, certainly all the way through 2019, and we are continuing that work internally, and that good important work and some extraordinary leadership by our staff as well. And I think that's just been everyone's really appreciated that incredible contribution to help push us and ask those incredibly important questions so that we can figure out together what the right solutions are.
Do you want me to go next, Cathy? Okay. Thank you, Sadie, for such a powerful and thoughtful question. And thanks, Stacy, for your really thoughtful answer. So this is like I was going to say this is a 3-hour seminar. This is actually a course. This is a whole course. But I have about 2 minutes. So there's let me come at it from 3 ways. I think, first of all, there's a philosophical shift underway, certainly from an international NGO perspective, where I'm currently doing my work and finding myself. So there's the philosophical conversations and how we're translating those into how we do the work, reimagining really how we do the work. The second is organizational changes. We are literally transforming and going through a process of transformation of our organizations. And the third is a change in language and communication, maybe if I can put it that way. The first piece around the philosophical shifts and how that's shifting into how we do the work, I think I answered a little bit earlier when Blythe asked about how COVID-19 is really impacting our work. We will not go back to the way that we used to do this work. In the kind of traditional post-war international NGO humanitarian context. In the most fragile places of the world, by that I mean places like Syria and Yemen, where there is literally the state infrastructure is so fragile. That's different. I have to say that is a bit different. But in the more development-oriented and for that global development major, how we do this work is going to radically transform, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's a good thing. It's a really good thing. Organizationally, we're transforming. We're having hard, thoughtful, sometimes uncomfortable conversations about diversity, inclusion, equity within our staff, at our board. We need to really look at a board that reflects the people that we serve and the people with whom we work. And I would say the same in terms of our staff. And then the third piece is around communications and language. And just to give a couple of examples, we're making very significant changes, not only at Care Canada, but across the organization internationally, in the kind of fundraising that we do. And so we are not using certain images anymore, to be quite literal about this. We show pictures, we show images, we use language that's about strength. We use language that's about supporting people. We don't talk about beneficiaries. We talk about the people in other communities around the world with whom we do this work. So it's less about us coming in as the saviors to do the work to make everything better, and more about what do we need to bring to the table to work with those local leaders in that local context and work together to lift up everybody. So you will see changes in our organization and in others, I hope, in the kinds of images that we use, in the words and the language that we use, in the kinds of asks that we do, and in the way in which we're communicating to our publics. We have been taken to task. I will be very clear about that. There's an organization, just to name one, called No White Saviors. They're based in, I believe, Uganda or Kenya, and they've been very critical of the international NGOs like CARE and others as well. And they would be a good example of this conversation and how it's playing out in the public discourse.
Those are great suggestions and ideas. And Sadie, this is the question of our time for sure. We are seeing so many organizations struggle with this, struggle in a good way, struggle in a bad way. The narrative of the charity model, which is, hundreds, centuries old, the charity model of the wealthy giving to the poor, is still embedded in so much of our sector and so much of our work. And so it's the narrative around white saviorism and the charity model is finally really being talked about openly, more than I've ever seen in my whole career, frankly. And organizations are struggling with it. They're hiring consultants to help them. They're listening to their staff. They're doing meaningful work. But this change is not going to happen overnight. And I know some of our partners and colleagues that are not white are getting frustrated with the length of time that it's been taking for real change to happen. So no solutions. I know we are on our own journey, and it's uncomfortable and it's challenging. And I've done some white fragility training, and it's very it is eye-opening to, especially coming from a place of privilege in Ontario in Canada. And I think that this is something that our sector is going to grapple with. But the most important thing, and what I've learned already just in the last couple of years, is to be completely transparent and to make mistakes, but to keep trying and to keep learning and unlearning, and to keep trying as much as we can. And it affects our workforce, our volunteers, the programs we do, the language we use, the communications. And it's not a checklist. And I think the organizations that see it as, we have a DEI checklist and here's the 5 things we need to do to be anti-racism. It's how our organizations should work. It should be part of our DNA. And that's going to take a while to get to that next level. And in some ways, I think our sector will be ahead of the game from other sectors. And sometimes I think we're far behind other sectors. So, but there's much work to be done.
Awesome. Thank you, Sadie, for that question. That was a really good question. So I have a few in the chat, but for time's sake, I'm going to ask the most recent one. So Caitlin asks, just to all of the panelists, if I have an idea for a nonprofit organization, what are the first steps to take to work toward making it a reality? Yep, go ahead, Cathy.
Can I go? Because this is, I get this question a lot. Almost every day I actually get an email from students or young people around starting a nonprofit. And the first thing I would say is, as I mentioned, there are 58,000 nonprofits in Ontario. I am sure there is already one that is somewhat related to what you want to do. So starting a nonprofit it requires boards of directors and incorporation and resources. And so really do your homework. Look around. Who is, if you're passionate about, kittens, who's doing that work around kittens, or climate justice, or housing rights. Find out what they work on. And we're really promoting a concept called shared platforms, which is where nonprofits and charities, they can incubate or support emerging projects or initiatives. So there's a big difference between you have a great idea for a project or initiative and you need to find a home or some support for it, versus starting a nonprofit or a charity from scratch. So really think through, if it's a project or initiative, I am quite confident that you can find an organization that has the same values and interests as you, and there might be a great fit there. Of course, it's not difficult to start a nonprofit, and there's handbooks out there. It's called the Incorporator's Handbook in Ontario. Starting a registered charity is a bit more detailed and a bit more specific, and it's hard work to run and manage a charity. So again, I would just say do your homework first, and then take it in a stepped way.
Totally agree. I'm not going to, like you said everything I would say, Cathy, and maybe just to frame it slightly differently. I wouldn't frame it as I want to start a nonprofit. I would say, I want to do something about this issue in the world. Is there a nonprofit already in this space that wants my talent and my capability and my thought leadership to help lever them forward, and find that platform, to use Cathy's word? Find an organization that offers you the platform for your talent and your time to lever it forward, because it just managing an organization in and of itself takes a huge amount of your time and your energy, and there's too much to do in the world, frankly. And we've got enough organizations, mostly, I think, on the ground already. You just need to find the right organization where your talents are going to make a difference.
Okay, awesome. Do you have anything to add, Stacy? No? Okay, cool. So in the essence of time, I think that unfortunately has to be our last question. I know a few other people had some questions. I'm sure our lovely panelists would be willing to answer them, possibly over LinkedIn or something else. So if you can find them on LinkedIn, maybe that's your way in. Also, I know Ben usually does this plug, but if you're not already in the Queens Connects, like Career Connects LinkedIn group, join. And then I'll just pass it over to Samara.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for everybody for coming and participating in this event. These conversations are really great to have, especially during today, which is the Transgender Day of Visibility. For those that might not know, this is a day to highlight transgender representation and the success of trans activism and philanthropy, but also all the ways that trans and non-binary people have contributed to art, culture, and society. So I hope that this is something that everybody notes today, possibly reads up on, and keeps in mind as we reflect on the importance of social impact today. So just a note, all participants will be getting a Queen's email with a survey that we ask for you to complete. And now I would just like to hand it off to my colleague Megan for a final announcement and to close off.
Thank you, Samara. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Davicia. Currently, I am one of the student transition ambassadors with the Queen's Student Alumni Association, and I am very excited that I am the incoming president for QSAA for the 2021-2022 year. And I'm just going to share my screen very quickly to give a quick announcement. Great. So along with fantastic events like the one we just had today, the Queen's Student Alumni Association is committed to really connecting students to alumni to better prepare them for success upon graduation. And very exciting, we are currently hiring for various director positions. So applications for our director positions are ending this Friday, April 2nd at 11:59 p.m. And I highly encourage you to apply if any of these interest you. And for more information and a full description of all of the director positions, please visit our website, which I will be sharing in the chat just after this, to find out a little bit more. And as well, please reach out if you have any questions to any of our social media pages. We would love to have you on the team this coming year. So I really encourage you to apply and hope to see your applications. And with that, thank you so much, Stacy, Barbara, and Cathy, for your insights. I really enjoyed this event, so I want to thank you for your time. And with that, good luck on exams to everyone here, and have a great rest of the term. Thank you.